session, and today, as I've been flying around the country, as a matter of fact, I've literally gotten off the plane half an hour ago, jumped in the car, raced home, walked in the door, and turned on the computer to do this live. So hence the little bit later start time than usual. But I guess been great engagement as we went around the country doing our Developer Launchpad series. That really came about from talking to my community, sending an email out to all of them and asking one simple basic question, and that is, what is your biggest property problem? And we were inundated with over 250 different responses to that, and have used that to collate a series that we called Developer Launchpad. And today's session, the topic being 9 steps to success, is a little bit of a summary of that without going into the full 3-hour session that we actually went into. So that's kind of today. I can see a few people jumping on, so I'll just say a general g'day, but I'm going to save the questions for the end, if that's okay, folks, because I have been talking for days and days, and I'm really wanting to just kind of power through this and then grab the questions at the end if I can. So the 9 steps to success. These 9 steps have been honed not only from myself, but actually watching the engagement in my community with our monthly meetups all around the country. We've been running them for just short of 8 years in Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne. And in doing that, what I've seen is a whole bunch of common issues and challenges in how people are actually approaching their property development career. And so I've put these 9 steps to success to try and help to, harness the troops and get them all going in the right direction. Because as all of you know, I've set myself a goal of setting 1,000 people financially free, and so trying to help them, lock and load their strategies and their execution plan is really key and crucial to that process. So I'm going to talk about the 9 steps. I'm just going to name them first, and then I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on a couple of those in particular where I've seen lots of challenges, and where all of those questions came from when we asked the community how that was actually going. So the 9 steps to success. Step number 1: choose your strategy. This is really important because a number of people don't lock their strategy in. They suffer from bright, shiny object-itis. And when they do, they're not very clear on where they're going. They burn a lot of energy by flip-flopping around in different places. Step number 2, choose your counsel. And we choose our counsel based on a whole bunch of strategic objectives where we can see the federal government have pushed down some strategic direction down to local government, down to state government. State government have also then done some strategic plans to see how and where populations are going to grow, and then that pushes down into the local council areas. So that helps us to actually choose our councils. Step number 3 is, once we've actually chosen our council, then we're going to then start to determine if our strategy is actually going to work in every suburb in that council. And there's a process that I go through to try and help you pull the suburb apart, reverse engineer it, and see whether or not the strategy you have chosen will actually work in every single suburb. And the reason for that is that every strategy works, but it doesn't work everywhere. And what we're trying to do is find evidence of success that others have done that before us. Step number 4, build your team. Now, this is going to be based on the fact that you've got a locked-in strategy in a locked-in council, which means that, and then in some locked-in suburbs, so you can start to analyze what development applications have actually occurred in your area. Have a look at council applications and see who has done what in your area, and then start talking to those individual consultants, so the town planners and civil engineers and architects and the like. You can start to build your team based on the evidence of other people having done it before you. Once you've filled your team, step number 5 is find deals using your opportunity funnel. There's a whole bunch of things that we need to do to actually find deals, but we are needing to get them from agents. We need to get them from on market. We're needing to get them from off market. There's a number of tips and tricks and the like that I can actually give you in actually jamming opportunities into your funnel. When you're very experienced, I'm going to say that you need 100 deals into your funnel to get one pop out as an actual deal. Whilst you're learning the process, that is going to be more likely 300 going into the opportunity funnel before one pops out of the bottom. And because it's so many going in, that means you need to be very good at your site analysis, which coincidentally is step number 6. So your site analysis is critical to actually understanding the issues and challenges that you're actually going to face on your site. So I have a method called the rapid elimination method that shortcuts how we can actually look at that in a toll gating process, where we do a 10-minute toll gate, a 2-hour toll gate, etc. as we move on through the process with a view to throwing away sites rather than keeping them. The concept there being is the quicker you can throw a site away, then the more opportunities you can actually look at in less time. Assuming that you've done your site analysis well, you're going to then use that to actually identify the issues and challenges on the site. That's going to formulate your feasibility, which is then going to determine the profitability of the deal. So assuming that that passes that toll gate, you'll move on to step number 7, which is your acquisition mode. Now, your acquisition mode is very tactical. And I say that very deliberately because as you go into a deal right now, you're going to base that on your current financial situation. So how much money you've got right now, how much liquid cash you've got, how much equity, how much serviceability, that is based on this moment in time. The second you go into a deal, then your whole situation changes. And so if a second deal comes along, then you need to be potentially pick up that site in a very different way because all your funds are consumed in the first deal. So your acquisition is very tactical to say, what is the needs of the vendor that we're actually trying to solve? And given the toolkit that I've got behind me with how many different ways I can do a contract and how many different ways I can control a property and how much resources I've got with regards to money partners and the like, then how would I actually try to either acquire or control that property? Step number 8 is then running the deal. This is following the bouncy ball now that you've actually got it under contract, and we're going to actually run the deal. So we're going to get our development approvals and get the constructions and get our titles and all those sorts of things. And then step number 9 is exiting the deal. And whilst it is step number 9 in the process, you should actually be thinking about that all the way up front when you're actually acquiring the site, because step number 9 is a strategic decision to say, am I keeping the finished stock? Am I going to roll the stock over, sell it, cash down, all those sorts of things? And so, you'd be tactical in going into the acquisition and you're strategic in going out, because you want to be setting yourself up for the next deal. The last thing that you want to do is be, trying to get yourself in a position where when you exit the deal, you can't acquire your next deal. So very important that you're very strategic in your thinking there. I'm just going to take a very quick sip. I've been talking all weekend, was fortunate enough to be in Melbourne doing our, developer launchpad event down there with about 145, 150 people down there. So a fantastic day, but a very, very long day. So I'm a little bit quenched. So they're the 9 steps, folks. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into 4 of those in particular, where when we asked that question out to our community and said, where is your biggest property problem? They basically landed in 4 very specific areas. So I'm going to drill into those in a little bit more detail, but I'm not going to go into all the detail of all of them, but given our time constraints. So choosing the strategy, lots of people had lots of issues in doing that. They were concerned that they can't get into a particular strategy because of the fact that it's too expensive to get into an area. They were concerned that they didn't know how to do that with no money down deals. They were concerned with all sorts of things like that. So picking the strategy seemed to be where people were struggling quite significantly. The next area is they didn't know how to be, do their suburb selection. So didn't quite know how to narrow down the areas that they were trying to farm and make sure that they were farming in the right areas to make sure that there's actually opportunities there, or the probability for an opportunity is quite high. Now, the reality is that most strategies will have a deal or two pop up in every single suburb, but the last thing you want is to have one or two deals in an entire year. Rather, you want to be farming in an area where you've got 30 or 40 opportunities in a year, and you've got plenty of opportunity to beat some other people out on those. Next problem they had lots and lots of issues was the site analysis side of things. So I'm going to touch on that in a little bit more detail. And lastly, they had plenty of problems in and around acquisition, and specifically how to acquire a property when they have no money, and how to finance deals, and specifically larger deals. So I'm going to touch on those 4 areas in particular. I'm going to skip over the other 9 steps. I've kind of named them, I've named them out, but we're going to go into those in a little bit more detail. So step number 1, choosing your strategy. So in choosing our strategy, folks, there are a ton of different strategies to think about. There are cash flow strategies, there are renovation strategies, there's subdivision strategies, and there are variations of those. There's splitters, there's boundary realignments, there's small lot subdivisions, there's large lot subdivisions. There's multi-unit dwellings, so there's units and townhouses and medium rise and high rise and relocatable homes and all those sorts of things. There's also multi-key type strategies, so you've got duplexes, dual occupancies, granny flats, auxiliary dwellings, secondary dwellings, all those sorts of things. And then you've got houses of multiple occupancy where you rent per room, so a rooming accommodation, boarding house, Airbnb, etc. Then you've also got commercial strategies where you're, owning a commercial facility like a childcare centre, aged care, retail, office, medical or industrial or something along those lines. So many strategies to choose from. But here's the thing, folks, they all work. So just choose one. And in choosing one, you need to look at some very specific criteria, which I'll go into in a moment. But the criteria is really going to be based around your risk appetite, your access to cash, your access to cash flow, your penchants for risk. So some people like taking a little bit more risk, others don't. How long you need to wait for payday. So if a strategy takes 2 years or so, like a townhouse strategy or a unit strategy, and if you can't wait 2 years, then that strategy is not going to work for you. It's also going to be how much time do you actually have to invest in the strategy in itself. So what can you actually put into the process to move you along the tracks. And then lastly, it's got to do with your personal preferences. You put all of that effort in, folks, and what you find at the tail end of that is that, there's things that just resonate with you. So you might have 2 strategies that might fit from all of the other, what I call money rules, the risk and the time and the access to funds. But when you actually get down to it, there's certain things where people just have a personal preference. If you like picking up a paintbrush, then chances are you're going to like renovations over and above subdivisions. If you don't like picking up a paintbrush, it's probably going to be the other way around. So once you've chosen your strategy, that's where you start to learn the skills and the rules that sit in and around that strategy. So what is that counsel actually wanting you to do in that area, for example? The next thing you want to be looking at, as I said, is acquiring the deal. So you need to be very, very tactic, and exiting the deal. And we're going to touch on those a little bit later in the process. Now, in going through the process, what we've found is many people will go and do a course because somebody at the front of the room has told them that this particular strategy is the only strategy for them, and it's the only way that you're actually going to make money. The challenge with that is it doesn't always suit everyone. And so what you'll find is if it suits you in particular, then you're going to get a fantastic outcome from that particular course. But if it doesn't suit your circumstances, then you're going to have a very bad experience, and that course isn't going to solve your problem. And that created a number of people in my community that did lots and lots of courses that didn't actually help them because it didn't fit their particular circumstances, and they burnt a lot of money. Now, that's not the fault of the course. I want to be very, very clear here. It's not the fault of the course. the issue is that they weren't clear on what their strategy was up front. They weren't clear on what their issues and challenges were that they needed to solve. And because of that, they went into the course naively thinking that it was going to solve their problem, and unfortunately it did not. So because of that very reason, myself and a good friend of mine, Tony Meredith, who works in our program as a life and business coach, put together a 2-day event called The Psychology of Property Development, which was really designed purely at how do we actually get you to choose your development strategy and lock that in and have that be your guiding force and your North Star for what you're going to do for the next 5 years. And then build yourself a 5-year roadmap of projects that you're going to do that's actually going to set you financially free. So that event we've got actually coming up in the next couple of weeks. I'll tell you a little bit about the logistics of that towards the end of this call. But I guess in doing that, running that for several years, we've actually evolved that over time, and it is a very, very, I'm going to say, enlightening and moving experience where it actually not only looks at your development strategy, but also looks at all of the mindset issues that actually get into your head that actually stop you pulling the trigger on half of these strategies that you're thinking about. So the fact that you're telling yourself, I can't do deals because I've got no money, well, I'm going to call bullshit on that because we can show you hundreds of examples of people with no money in our network that have been doing plenty of no money down deals. So then you say, well, I can't find any deals because in my area. Well, I'm going to call bullshit on that as well. And the reason is that you guys, if you're not locking in one strategy to get to know those rules very well, you're not going to see those opportunities. And there's a whole bunch of other limiting beliefs that we put in front of us. So what we do is we combine the strategy side of things with the mindset side of things. And what we find is that 20% of what people are trying to do is skills, and 50% of it is mindset. And 30% of it is effort, folks, which means that's up to you guys. But what I see so much is that the effort is burnt by looking at too many things, doing bright, shiny objectitis and flip-flopping around between strategies and looking between areas and that sort of thing. So we put together this Psychology of Property Development event very specifically to try and help you to navigate your way to picking your strategy and navigating your way to building that 5-year roadmap. Now, I'm quite fortunate that as we have grown as a community, we've now increased our arsenal, and we've now got Kylie Walker, who's also joining us as a property coach in our program. So it's going to be myself, Tony, and Kylie delivering this this weekend. So I'm going to talk to the, I guess, how to enroll for that and price points and that sort of thing at the end of this presentation. So for now, I'm just going to skip it. Now, I did say that those 9 steps. So step number 2, choosing your counsel. The reality here, folks, is there's 537 different counsels in Australia. And so once you have locked in what your strategy is, locking in your counsel is the very next thing that you need to do. And the reason is that once you've got your one strategy, there's 537 different sets of rules to actually enact that strategy. So lock in a strategy and look at your local state government. They will have strategic plans as to how and where population is going to grow in the area and where they see those population densities actually moving to. They will be building infrastructure projects in and around your area, telling you exactly where people are actually going. And based on those strategic plans from the state government, that will tell you very clearly and succinctly which councils are going to be receiving the population in the next coming years. Now, folks, we've got more than 10 million people that are going to be growing in population in Australia over the next 25 years. So that's 400,000 people needing a home every year for the next 25 years. So if you pick your council right, then the demand for the product that you are creating is going to be insane. So make sure that you do that. Look at those strategic plans, choose the council that you're wanting to do, and then once you've chosen the council, the next thing you want to do is assess every single suburb in that council to determine if your strategy is going to work in that area. Now, in doing that, what we do is we look for evidence of success of other people, okay? Now, we don't want to be pioneers. If we're going into an area and you're a pioneer, you've got no evidence at all that the product that you're going to create has any demand, and you've got no evidence at all that it's going to sell for the price point that you expect. And so that's the kind of thing that really, really experienced developers will actually be doing. But as a entry-level developer, what I want you to be doing is instead looking for evidence that other people have done exactly what you're trying to do in that area, and reverse engineer their deals to a point where you can prove that those people were actually profitable. And in doing so, we then want to say, well, we don't want to be the last one in. So being first in is dangerous, but being last one in is also dangerous. So we want to make sure that we then look at the demographics of the area and make sure that there is still enough demand and not too much supply for what we're after. And if that demand and supply ratio is appropriate and the profits have been there, then it makes sense for us to be farming in those areas. Now I'll give you some insights and tips into how that works, in how to assess that. What you're going to be doing is trying to find evidence of sales of the original raw site, and you want to make sure that it is truly a comparable site. So you want to make sure that it's got the right zoning, it's got the right land size for exactly the size deal that you're actually trying to do. There's no point looking at something that'll do 5 townhouses if all you can do is afford 2. So make sure that it's got the appropriate land size that actually fits your strategy and the appropriate zoning. When you look at those evidence of sales, you're then going to try and rule out the ones that are anomalies in that data, because there's always anomalies in your data. So deceased estates and related sales and houses that sold that whilst it was technically developable, someone had built a mansion on it, and it was no way that the intrinsic value on that property would actually be worth knocking that house down for. So you're going to rule all of those out and come up with a price point to say, how much am I actually buying the raw site for? Once you've done that, you're going to do exactly the opposite. You're going to go to the tail end and you go, how much is the sale of the finished product actually selling for? So depending upon your strategy, if you're selling brand new townhouses, then you've got to look for how much a brand new townhouse has been selling for in my area, in this particular region. You're also, if you're doing vacant land sales, you're going to look for how much a vacant land's selling for. When you know what the sale of the finished product is, and you know how many of those finished products you're creating, you now know what your likely income is going to be. You want to subtract the median price of the raw site. You want to subtract the typical costs that are going to be to run that particular project in that area. And you're going to know what those typical costs are by talking to your consultants and understanding what your council contribution rules are and all that sort of thing, because you are now a strategy expert and you are now an area expert. And then the money that's left over is the potential profit in the deal. And what you'll find, folks, is that 80% of the 80% of the suburbs out there do not make commercial sense for your particular strategy. They might make sense for a different strategy. And they may make sense for the odd deal here and there. So if somebody buys extraordinarily well, or if they sell extraordinarily well, or if they come up with the perfect site that doesn't have any issues or challenges. But we don't want a perfect storm to come to us. We want to be able to buy the average developable site and be able to sell at the average price and run at the average cost. And if we can do that and be profitable, then chances are we're going to have plenty of deals in that particular area. Now, for those of you who know about my property development formula program, we provide a whole bunch of tools that help our guys to actually help analyze those suburbs in actually doing that. So we have a suburb analysis spreadsheet, and we also have a thing called a rough cut FISO, which helps us to reverse engineer those suburbs. And it really, at the end of it, it gives you a red light, green light as to whether or not that suburb is actually worthwhile in actually trying to execute. I won't go into that in too much more detail, other than to say, you know, if you've got a green light, then a little bit more work to prove that the demographics make sense. But what we've proven is the previous evidence of other people doing things means that it's an area that's highly likely to be profitable. So now we just look for the demographics to make sure that the supply and demand is still going to keep us on track in that area moving forward. And so based on us choosing that area, we're now going to become area experts. We're going to understand every street in that area, what all the zonings are for that, where the schools are, where the shops are, what end of the street is the cheap end of the street, what end of the street is the more expensive end. We're going to know which agents you are very good to buy from and which agents are very good to sell from. All of those things that are critical in the process. Next thing that that you will do, I guess, when you start to become an area expert, as I said before, is you're going to start to look at all of the previous development applications in the area, pull them apart, see what consultants were working on which particular elements, and you're going to see which town planners are prevalent in the area and the success rates that they're getting. You're going to see what surveyors and civil engineers are doing in the area and start to talk to them about, I guess, how they engage, what their price points are, what are the typical issues they see in the area, what the councils like to deal with, all that sort of thing as part of your selection process. Next thing you want to do is start filling your deal with funnel. Let me rephrase that. Start filling your funnel with deals. So we're going to, as I said before, we need, as entry-level developers, you're going to need about 300 properties popping into your funnel before you get one pop out. So we need to be searching for deals in all sorts of places. So we're going to jam opportunities in from online. So you're going to look at your realestate.com and your domain and your listings from your local real estate agent. You're going to be talking to agents, sales agents, and make sure that they know that you're out there and looking for particular deals and let them know what your deal criteria are. You're going to be talking to buyers agents and let them know that you're happy for them to be paid a finder's fee if they bring you a deal that is both developable and profitable. You're going to be sending letters out to people unsolicited to see whether or not they're actually looking to sell because you've analysed the area and you think their particular property is one that is on your radar. And you may even go door knocking if you feel so inclined, or you may get agents to go door knocking on your behalf. But if you do all of that, your funnel is going to get very full very fast, which means that your next step is, how do I actually then start to analyze my sites very fast, very efficiently, and very effectively? And this is where my rapid elimination method comes into play. The whole concept behind this is, if you look at any normal development application, there are over 300 odd rules that you probably need to comply with in order to lodge to council. If you try to spend all the time analysing all the answers for all 300 up front, you're going to spend days or weeks trying to analyse a single site. So instead, we flip that on its head and say, well, we're not looking for a reason to keep it. Instead, we're looking for a reason to throw it away. And what we do is break it down into a series of toll gates that go through some key criteria that knock the site out very, very quickly. And to do that, you need to be an area expert. You need to actually understand what federal, state, and local government rules may actually apply in your area, and know what particular constraints that might be applied that may impact your site from stopping it from reaching its maximum potential. The zoning, which is what the real estate agent will sell you on, is the maximum potential, but the constraints that sit there, the overlays, the contours, the frontages, and those sorts of things, they're the things that will limit that potential from actually occurring. So if you get very, very good at identifying those critical constraints, you can spend about 10 minutes determining is it actually a developable site. Now, what we're trying to do here is just work out very, very high level. We're not going to try and solve all the problems. We're just going to try and solve the critical ones to say, does it throw it away? There's plenty of time to put more effort in later on if it passes the first toll gate. So in 10 minutes, we will be looking at those critical overlays and we'll be putting some typical costs into a quick FISO type analysis to say, if we were able to run this, I guess, on the typical costs of that particular project, would it be within an order of magnitude profitable? Now, it's very important to understand order of magnitude profitable here. This is not down to the dollar accurate. What this is it within the range that I would be happy with? There's plenty of time to get down to the dollar accurate later on in the process. But if it's down to the dollar, if it's within the order of magnitude, it justifies actually spending a bit more time. But if it's way outside of your range, if you're looking for $100,000 or $150,000 profit in your deal, and it's only showing 30 or 40,000, then it's nowhere near the mark. So you're going to flick that very, very quickly. So that's quick and dirty. That's 10 minutes. The next toll gate, assuming it passes that toll gate, so you're going to be throwing it away, throwing it away, throwing it away. And then if it passes, now we're going to put about 2 hours into it. So this is a much more detailed analysis. This is where we start to look at every single constraint that sits on the site. So all of the different overlays, where are the contours, where is our services located, all those sorts of things to understand with a lot more level of accuracy that feasibility and what issues, challenges, problems that we need to solve in actually trying to do that. Now, when we identify a problem, depending upon your level of experience, you may be able to say, well, I've seen that problem before, I can speculate what that price point is to solve that problem. Or you may have to make a few phone calls to some of your consultants and say, hey, I've got this particular issue. Can you give me some guidance on what you've seen a typical price point is to solve that? So our feasibility starts to get a little bit more accurate. So it's more detailed, but at this point it's not yet complete. So we've taken it away from the order of magnitude and we're getting a little bit more detailed and we're trying to rough that in a little bit more accurately. But at this point it's not yet down to the dollar. So if we've spent about 2 hours at this point, assuming that we are an area expert, which means that we know our price points, we know our area really well, and B, we've done our 2 hours, we've analysed that site to a point where we know all the issues and challenges that are sitting on it and the likelihood of that project actually working in our area at that point in time. So at this point, I would be prepared to actually take that to contract. Conditional on putting in a due diligence clause, which then allows me to do the full level of feasibility that I need to do and do absolutely everything to get this down to a down to the dollar level accuracy on our feasibility. Now, the beauty about doing this approach is multiple. So firstly, you're very, very quick in going to market because you're doing this 10-minute toll gate, 2-minute toll gate, you're an area expert, so you can actually make decisions very, very fast, which I know a number of people suffer from analysis paralysis, and this helps us to actually overcome that. I guess the next thing that it does is it takes all your competitors away from the site. If you've got that under contract, everyone else runs away. And so now your vendor is emotionally invested in your sale. Because they're emotionally invested in your sale, they then want that to go to completion because in their head, they've already spent the money. So in your due diligence, if you find an issue or a challenge, you have two choices. One, you can throw the site away, or two, you can go back and renegotiate with that vendor and get a discount on the property. Now, I've done that many, many times, folks. I've had $5,000 discount, $10,000 discount, $30,000, $50,000, and my record is an $80,000 discount after signing the contract because my due diligence actually identified some issues and challenges that meant that it wouldn't make sense if I didn't get the discount. Now, why would they renegotiate with you after the contract's signed? Well, it's quite simple. Because everyone's run away, they need to take an educated decision to say, I'm not sure if everybody's actually going to come back. So when they put it back on the market, it's a maybe that people may come back. They may have actually run away completely. And then the next thing they have to do is do some soul searching and say, well, even if they do come back, are they likely to find the same issue in their due diligence as this gentleman just found? In which case, chances are they're going to beat me up as well. And all I've done is burn 2 or 3 months in the process. So generally, if you've got a valid reason for renegotiating, most people will actually engage in that process. So don't be afraid of it, folks. So step 7 is the acquisition mode. At this point, you're looking at a number of different things. This is tactical in how you actually acquire the property. So by tactical, I mean you need to actually understand your current financial circumstances, and depending upon where you're actually sitting, you're going to say, well, I can't do this with an outright purchase, so therefore it's going to have to be something creative. It might be a joint venture or an option contract or something along those lines. That's going to determine the kind of contract that you go in with. It's also going to determine the kind of entity that you go in with, because the entity that you go in with is going to be very subjective to, are you working by yourself or are you working with someone else? You need to understand everyone's issues and challenges around asset protection and also tax minimisation in actually setting that up. You also need to understand what special conditions you're going to wrap around that and get very, very good at your negotiation process. And the negotiation process here, folks, is how well can I actually understand the vendor's needs? Why are they selling this property in the first place? And why would they want to sell it to me when I'm trying to create ask for these creative terms because I've got no money or I've got limited access to funds or the like? And the reality is, the better you get to know your vendor and the better you get to know their issues, challenges, and needs, the more likely you are to be able to come up with a solution that fits their requirements and also fits yours. Too many times, folks, we are trying to solve our problem and we forget about the problem of the vendor who, I guess, the property that we're actually purchasing. So make sure that you are very cognizant of trying to understand their current position and what their needs and challenges are. There's also a whole bunch of no money down strategies that I have covered in other of these Facebook Lives. I'm not going to go through that today, but there's a number of no money down strategies that you can actually get to in order to acquire the property if and where required. I guess the next thing that we're going to do is then run the deal. So running the deal, we need to, I guess, get all of our development approvals in place. We need to understand what issues and challenges council are going to come back to us with from a conditions perspective. We then need to enact those conditions. So it could be building the sewer and stormwater and sewer, etc. It could be building, I guess, units and townhouses. It could be repairing footpaths and driveways, etc. But we can predict those right up front based on evidence of other conditions that council have placed in advance. So we know what they're going to be. Now what we have to do is get the appropriate approvals to actually get them in place and then run the project to make it happen. Which is where project management comes in. So project management is going to have a look at all the tasks that we need to do and understand which tasks can be done independently and which tasks fall on what is called a critical path. So one task is dependent on a previous task being performed. So if task number 1 is then delayed, that means task number 2 is delayed by default, which means that our project gets blown out. When you look at your tasks and you understand that critical path, that's going to tell you when you need to be acting with urgency on particular issues and when it doesn't matter if there's a day or two slippage. There are some tasks that it is absolutely critical that you're on top of all the time. And there are other tasks where, a week or two slippage won't matter at all. I guess then you're going to take through to construction, assuming that you're going to be doing a build. So putting your tender specs together, going out, I guess, for a tender itself, finding your builder, getting your construction contract in place and actually managing and running that all the way through. And then lastly is exiting the deal. So in exiting the deal, you want to make sure that you've assessed right at the very, very start before you've acquired it, what your preferred exit strategy is, but you should also have multiple exit strategies in mind. So a plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D, and know what events are actually going to trigger those. So if your money partner loses their job, for example, then you may have to enact one of your plan B or plan C strategies very early in the process. You also want to understand that you don't get paid until the finished product is actually sold. So you're going to be selling off the plan, or are you going to be selling at the end of the process? If you're selling off the plan, the sales process is a little bit more difficult and you may have to deal with project marketers or similar, so your commission rates might be a little bit higher. And it's a little bit more difficult because the product can't be seen, it can't be felt, it can't be walked through, all those sorts of things. So people are trying to use their imagination to see what it's going to be like. And they're also having a lot of faith in the fact that you've said you're going to build it to a certain build spec and it may or may not be there. So they generally ask for a discount when you're selling off the plan. But when you do that, it takes risk off the table. It's a known entity. You know what your income's going to be, and you know that before you enact your finance, you've got certainty in your exit strategy. The alternate is to go for post-sale, so selling at the end of the process. Now, this is where people can touch it, they can feel it, they can smell it, and they can they can see themselves sitting in that complex or on that block of land, and at this point you're likely to get the higher sales price. But the flip side to that is you're also at peak debt of your project. And so if you do not get the sales, then your interest rate starts to hurt you very, very quickly, very, very fast. So you want to understand how and where that sits in the process, and you're going to take an educated decision based on, do I want to take risk off the table by selling pre-sales and have certainty in my exit? Or do I want to roll the dice and sell at the tail end and try and get maximum cash out of the deal? Now, depending upon your experience, depending upon the the financier that you're using, they may mandate one over the other, or they may give you a little bit of flexibility. But my guidance would be, especially when you're early in the process and you're still learning what's going on, take the conservative approach, get the pre-sales done. It may take a little bit longer, but it takes a whole bunch of risk off the table and allows you to have certainty at your exit point. So assuming that the sales have actually occurred, this is payday, folks. Right up until then, all of your cash has been leaving your pocket, and today is the first day that you actually get paid. And depending upon the strategy that you chose, that could be anywhere from 3 months from the original purchase date all the way out to 3 or 4 years, depending upon the strategy that you chose. So knowing that it's going to take that long for a payday, you want to make sure that you've managed your cash flow through that whole process. But when the money comes in, there is going to inevitably be tax. So you're going to need to understand your tax obligations. You're going to understand GST. And please, please, please do not think that you can get capital gains tax concessions in this. It is almost certainly going to be GST, because the way the ATO look at this is your intent. If your intent is to be operating with a view to making a profit, then they deem you to be running a business. If they deem you to be running a business, then GST will apply. So you're going to have GST on the sale of those projects. So you want to try and minimize that GST and look at a thing called the margin scheme. Now, I'm not going to go into the margin scheme right here, other than to say it's a way of reducing your GST obligations by having the difference between your original purchase price and the sale of the finished product and the margin that sits in between them. So that's the mandatory tax, and then the optional tax, and I say optional because it really depends on what entity you actually did the project in, then determines whether or not you're going to be paying company tax or individual tax, or potentially both. And so tax is a very important part of the process, and understanding that right up front, and that you are counting your profits after tax, not before tax, because otherwise your profits look very, very good, but what you actually get to spend is not much at all. So they're the 9 steps, folks. I rattled through those pretty quick, but that's what we went into in a lot more detail over the last 3 weeks in Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne when we did those developer launchpad events. And what we're really trying to do, folks, is get you just onto the first rung of this process. So the first rung is getting your strategy right. And the biggest problem that I see out there is a thing called bright shiny objectitis, where most of you aren't quite sure what your strategy is, and you flip-flop between many strategies. And because of that, we have put together our 2-day event called the Psychology of Property Development, where we walk you through a process and a framework that will help you to choose your development strategy. And then we then take that a step further and say, well, based on your development strategy and based on your ultimate financial goals, can we build a 5-year property action plan that is going to help you get to the point of financial freedom? So that is our ultimate goal out of that 2-day event. Anyone who's interested, we are running those in Brisbane next weekend on the 7th and 8th of March. And then we're going to be running another event in Sydney on the 14th and 15th of March. So anyone interested in those, it is $500 in order to come to that 2-day event. It is very highly worthwhile. I can encourage you very much to do that. You are not going to walk away being a property developer. Let me reassure you of that. But what you will be walking away with is knowing if you want to be a property developer, and if you do, what that development strategy is going to be, and have the belief in yourself because of the mindset side of things that you can actually enact that 5-year action plan that we're going to help you to build in and around that. So if anyone is interested, I will put a link in here, I guess towards the end, for you to jump onto to go and have a look at that. We are not running it in Melbourne for the people in Melbourne. We unfortunately just recently ran one in Melbourne, and so running another one in Melbourne this quickly just wouldn't make sense. We will be running it again, probably in a very slightly different format in October. So we might be rebranding it and changing the format. But effectively there will be a version of this in Melbourne coming up in October or so. But Brisbane this weekend, 7th and 8th. Sydney the weekend after on the 14th and 15th, folks. So hopefully you got plenty out of that. I'm just going to go quickly through the questions to see if there's anyone got any specific questions. And I can see lots of people saying hi. I can Julie saying, great session in Melbourne. Yep, long day and you deserve the drink. Thank you. I will take a sip just because of that. Nice, neat bourbon. Thank you. Lots of other people saying hi, so I'm not going to name everybody other than to say thank you very much. And Todd at the end says, all makes sense, great advice. We are already in pretty good shape financially, but I was wondering, is it typically 5 years to get solid financial security? So Todd, that really depends on your starting point, mate. It's a fantastic question. Depending upon your starting position and depending upon what your current debt levels are as to how you actually get financially free. The thing with financial freedom is it's very much a misunderstood term, and so I'm going to clarify that for everybody here. Financial freedom is where you have enough passive income to pay down your debts. So the fewer the debts you have, the much easier it is to get financially free. At the point where you are financially free, you do not need to go to work. Okay, because your bills are paid. You've got food on the table, you've got your phone being paid for, you've got fuel in the car, you've got your kids going to school, all of those sorts of things. And now time is the commodity that you have actually bought. Anything over and above that, Todd, then becomes a lifestyle choice. And many people want better than financial freedom. They want the lifestyle, with I guess the dream that people sell is the fancy car and the mansion and the Learjet and all that sort of stuff. That's all lifestyle stuff. That's not financial freedom. It's lifestyle. The first thing you want to do is actually get the true financial freedom up front. And to answer your question, yes, it is absolutely possible to do that in 5 years. And we will show you in that 2-day event how it is mathematically possible for you to do, provided that you do the work. I can teach you the skills, that's about 20% of the process. I can teach you the mindset, that's about 50% of the process. But the effort to enact it is about 30%, and that belongs to you. And if you are prepared to do the work, then absolutely 5 years is achievable for almost everyone out there, mate. It's just one of those things where you have to have faith in yourself and lock and load your strategy. Get very clear on your strategy, get very clear on your plan, and enact your plan. So hopefully that helps you, Todd. Peter's got a question as well. Hi, Rob. Apologies for not turning up in Melbourne. No problems, mate. So very much wanted to. I was away in Sydney. I may be recorded. Just hard to be in two places at once. Yes, mate. Is hard to be in two places. To answer the recording question, we get this quite a bit. Those developer launchpad events, we really want people in the room for those. So yes, we did record it, but no, it won't be released publicly. We'll carve those recordings up and release them in little snippets, I guess, to try and give you tidbits and tips along the way. But that's really why I've covered this today on the Facebook Live, is to try and give you some insights into what we covered on that day. So hopefully that helps, Peter. And then Peter Triong says, thanks, Rob. See you in 2 weeks. Perfect, buddy. Looking forward to it. So, folks, that is it. I don't think there's any more questions there. What I'm going to do right now is just type in there the link to the Psychology of Property Development event. Hopefully I can spell I'm hoping that actually works. Sometimes when I'm typing very, very fast, I get typos. So I'm just going to click on the link itself, make sure it actually works. And I don't know what I did. I've clearly typed that wrong. So allow me to resolve that, and I'll do that again. So unless there's any more questions, folks, once I post this link, I am going to call that a day, because I have had a killer weekend, folks. So there you go. There's the correct. There's the correct link there. So there it is, folks. I'm going to call it adieu at this point in time. I'm going to go finish my bourbon, go relax on the couch for a very well-deserved break after a massive 48 hours. And thank you everyone in Melbourne who turned up this weekend, everyone in Sydney who turned up last weekend, and everyone in Brisbane who turned up the weekend before. We had massive numbers compared to our normal meetups, folks, which just means that our message is getting out there. You guys are, I guess, spreading the word for us, which we are greatly appreciative of, and really looking forward to helping you guys on your journey. That's it, folks. It's good night from me, and it's good night for him. See ya.